I think it's really beneficial, and how I've seen the tools really, really work and carry throughout the organization is when the leaders of the organizations are involved.
We introduced person-centered training as a company-wide requirement for all employees, current and new. And the first group of people we put through was our administrative team. And one of the biggest changes was stopping, not looking at them as groups of people, like Bryant or Summit Avenue, the group, and looking at them as individuals and not numbers.
That's how it was. It was a number. You didn't know their names. It was just like, oh, client 11250. Since we've done person-centered training, the residents are first. Their needs are our top priority. I'm not above them. And that was the thinking back in the day, and we have changed so much.
Our biggest challenges were internal with our staff initially. The very notion of being person-centered, and everybody, we all believe we're person-centered. Everybody, we're trained to think individual, and we all have this perception that we're person-centered. But in practice, when we began partnering with our internal staff around people and what they really want versus what the staff believed was right for them and what was safest for them, we had our greatest pushback there, and it really took quite a while.
The biggest surprise is the impact on our employees, more so than even the people we're planning for. It's the best side effect of the whole movement within our organization of level 1 and level 2 changes.
When you come to work, it doesn't have to be as complicated as going through a whole entire person-centered meeting. It can be as simple as having staff come to me and say, I'm really struggling with this person. They're really having a lot of problems, and I just can't seem to make that, make it work. And I would say my first thing out of my mouth was, did you ask them?
We first came into this like with a steamroller. We thought, oh, we've got something wonderful. Let's make this happen. And we had a number of staff that just with as much enthusiasm pushed right back and said, you really don't understand that this is not safe. This isn't, this will just never work. So we learned for ourselves that we need to partner with our staff a little differently. Instead of just that we have the answer, just be consistently more curious and invite the staff to be more curious. They're the ones that know the person better.
When you want people to do things that are important for them, figuring out what's important to them. That was a lot, and it made a huge difference in the success that the staff was having. Instead of having a lot of people that we were doing crisis for, we were no longer in crisis as often.
And over time, we've had a significant shift in all of our internal staff and in our contracted providers as well. And person-centered thinking has become a significant part of our organization now. We use it in our supervision, in our talks, in our management, in our planning, in really pretty much every aspect of our work in Dakota County, particularly at my level. The tools of person-centered thinking are incorporated.
My job went from being the fireman or the chief of the fire department to being somebody who could pop around and visit with the people that we're supporting, get to know them on a deeper level, make sure our staff was all on the same page.
It really has been an effort from a top down and then again a bottom up, that we're not just looking or thinking about people with disabilities in person-centered thinking and planning. It's an organizational thought process for us, and that we're harvesting or coming up with all the capacities and strengths of everyone within our organization. So we're not just planning for someone who happens to have a disability. We're seeing everyone as an individual person with strengths and capacities.
As I was preparing for one of my gals that I work with, Kathy, her meeting, I knew that I wanted to incorporate, some of these tools that I learned. Kathy, she barely wanted me there. I remember calling her sister and saying, I need your help with this, because there are things that I prepared for Kathy's meeting that I really want to be a part of her meeting. So will you help me out here? It was really interesting how when Kathy saw the big giant Post-its on the wall and that those were for her. And that was a moment for her that I remember when she, her attitude shifted from kind of a, do we really have to do this, to, oh, those are for me, that we're talking about Kathy, we're here for Kathy, that there's nothing to hide, that what you see on the wall, that's what we're talking about.
One challenge that we put in front of ourselves this year was to use person-first language, and we had kind of almost a competition on not using client or consumer. It's harder than it sounds to do that, but then the person truly emerges and not just the system that we think we're working within.
Organizations have changed their forms to include language that makes more sense to people, that really focuses on what's important to people, rather than all of the deficit-based stuff that we have done in the past. And I think that's exciting for people. I can tell you about an agency that did something completely different with the way they do an annual planning process. So typically, people want to come in and they want to review what's been on the risk management plan, which it really focuses on what people are not very good at. And one agency decided that's not really what people want to do. We need to be focusing on what that person is good at and what they want to do for their future. And so they took poster boards and they hung them up on the wall, and they said, what's important to Mike? What would Mike love to do this year? And how can we best support Mike to be successful? And they hung those posters on the wall and then invited people almost in kind of an open house way, and had markers around, and people wrote all over the wall. And at the end of the meeting or open house, there were these posters that were filled with really great things about Mike, and Mike was beaming head to toe. And I think a lot of times we see people leave those annual planning meetings not feeling good about themselves or not feeling good about what happened. And why would you? We've just spent all that time talking about what you can't do. This really looks at what you can do and what's important to you.
A lot of what we've been doing is storytelling, that the storytelling is a critical and important part of person-centered thinking. Those success stories build on themselves and show opportunity where maybe we didn't think there was.
There's 4 people in a house, and in this one case that I'm thinking of, they'd all been living in the same house for many years, 2 of them for decades. And somebody came in, they'd only been there for about 8 years, and decided they wanted their own place. And staff thought, oh no, that couldn't happen. Everybody really thought that's not possible, except one of our social workers and a contracted provider said, well, maybe it is possible. And over the next several months, that did happen. And as soon as that person got out and had their own apartment and was making it and was still going back to that house to visit, the other 3 men in that house watched that and said, hey, maybe I can do that. Maybe that could be my experience as well. And when our staff sees that as well, it's hard to not become an advocate. It's hard not to see, what's working.
We had worked with a young lady who would come into the office and she would push on the staff's shoulder, and the staff would say, gosh, it really seems like she's kind of getting aggressive. What's up with her? What's up with her? So we tried a couple of different things, and what we found was when she came in the office and she pushed on your shoulder, we think it means that she wants you to stand up. And so what you should do is stand up. And as soon as we did that, as soon as she came in and touched our shoulder, we would stand up. She would sit in the chair, because we were the staff. We had the fancy chairs that spun in circles and swivels, and she had one that had 4 legs that sat on the ground. And she would get in our chair and she would spin in circles. And people might call it self-stimming behavior. I called it delighting herself. And she would spin, and then we'd say, okay, can I have my chair back? And she'd get up and she would turn around and walk right out of the room. And we could have taken the different approach. We could have said, we need to teach her not to push on her shoulder. We need to teach her not to do this. But she didn't have words to communicate. And she was telling us something like, hey, I really like that chair. I think I'm going to sit in it now. And it was great when you could just share that with all the staff. When she does this, you need to stand up because she wants to sit in that chair for a little bit.
I would say in using the matching tool, we have really become an organization that's had less turnover because we're building on people's interests. And when you're coming together over an interest, the disability disappears. About a year ago, we started an independent housing option with 3 gentlemen who wanted to come together, had lived together, or lived in the same community for really their whole lives, and they wanted to stay in this neighborhood that they knew. And so we developed this independent housing option right from the beginning using some of the person-centered principles. And we were able to match people on interests and build around what's important to them, not just what's important for them. And we have not had anyone want to leave that community of support in the last year.
One of the challenges I've come up against, not only within our own company, the thought process around that, but other companies that I've talked to in the years of doing person-centered thinking, has been the idea that it's more costly. This is a more costly way to do business. And we found within our company, one, it's been less expensive because we don't have to be providing so many hours to people we consider that are non-compliant or having what is known as behavioral issues, because when they're listened to, a lot of those issues go away. And that staff that we're using to put in place for that can be used other places. The initial cost of training may have been a problem, but after that, it was really a cost savings across the company. In every area that we looked, because everybody was jumping in. Our focus is now all on the individuals. So where we would have had to hire somebody to come in and do something, one of our admin might even say, hey, you know what, if somebody just needs a ride to school because they missed the bus, I'll do that. Or not having to put in staff because we don't need as many people to be supporting this person, or people going from structured group homes into independent housing options where they're only getting 6 hours instead of 24-hour one-on-one staffing. In fact, we have another young man who's about to graduate out of that and go into an independent housing option, and his dollars and cents are going to go from almost $300 some odd a day to $100 and some odd a day, and that's at the beginning. In the end, he's probably going to be even less.
Today, I believe that our role is to light the flame of hope. And with many of the people we support in the community, their experience with the system has been so challenging and so disruptive that sometimes there's very little hope left.
Traditionally, our services were based on, here's an individual, fit into what we provide you, and if you don't fit into that, we'll do something. You'll probably have to go somewhere different. And what we've done now, and what I specifically do with the individuals that I work with, is that we tailor our service to what their needs are. If somebody wanted a dog in one of our homes, we could come up with 42 different reasons why a dog was a horrible idea, and they were valid reasons. But we always failed to look at what one gentleman that I work with, doesn't have friends. He's got staff that are with him and different things like that, and it's something we really need to shoot for him. But he got a dog, and all of us crave somebody to love and to love us back, and just that small change. I don't care if all 42 things that were why we shouldn't do it happen. It was worth it.
It's often that when we use the person-centered thinking approach, we can get at somebody's life, and we may not need to use interventions to deal with challenging behavior.
There has been so much energy within our organization this year, and I think that comes from this kind of enlightenedness that there's a different way to do things, not that on top of, but rather instead of. And even in the way we approach one another, there's a lot of collaboration. I think our culture has become very curious and are asking questions that maybe we wouldn't have asked before.